Park Hyun-woo sat in the suffocating darkness of his private office, the only light coming from the cold glow of 6 surveillance monitors mounted on the wall before him. His finger hovered over the volume button, turning it up just enough to hear the soft creaking of floorboards 2 floors above. On the center screen, his 9-year-old daughter Hae-in lay motionless in her bed, her skeletal frame barely making an impression under the blankets. The cancer was devouring her from the inside out, and everyone knew it. Everyone could see it. But what nobody knew, what nobody could see, was whether the woman now entering Hae-in's bedroom would be the 8th caregiver to abandon his dying child. Amaka Okonkwo moved across the screen like a ghost, her dark skin nearly blending into the shadows of the dimly lit room. She carried a small tray with pills, water, and what looked like a damp cloth. Hyun-woo leaned forward, his scarred knuckles pressing into the mahogany desk. He'd installed these cameras 3 months ago after the 5th caregiver quit without notice, leaving Hae-in alone for 6 hours before he'd even known. He told himself it was about safety, about protection. But the truth he couldn't admit even to himself, was that he was waiting. Waiting to catch the exact moment this woman would prove she was just like all the others. Amaka set the tray down on the nightstand and reached for the pill bottle. Her movements were careful, methodical. She unscrewed the cap, tilted 2 white tablets into her palm, and then stopped. Her hand froze mid-air. Hyun-woo's pulse quickened. She was staring at the pills with an expression he couldn't quite read. Confusion, suspicion, fear. She brought the pills closer to her face, squinting at them under the weak lamplight. Then she did something that made Hyun-woo's breath catch in his throat. She set 1 pill down, picked up the other, and brought it to her nose. She sniffed it, once, twice, her brow furrowed deeper. Then, without warning, she crushed the pill between her fingers and brought the powder to her lips. She tasted it. "What are you doing?" Hyun-woo whispered to the empty room, his voice barely audible over the hum of the monitors. Amaka's face contorted immediately. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened in a silent gasp, and she stumbled backward, clutching her throat. The pill bottle tumbled from her other hand, scattering tablets across the hardwood floor like tiny white landmines. She collapsed to her knees, her body convulsing, and Hyun-woo shot to his feet so fast his chair toppled behind him. No. No, no, no. But Amaka wasn't screaming. She wasn't calling for help. Instead, even as her body shook violently, even as foam began forming at the corners of her mouth, she crawled, dragged herself across the floor toward the phone on the dresser. Her fingers trembled so badly she could barely grip it, but she managed to dial, managed to whisper 4 words that would change everything. "Child endangerment. Send ambulance." Then she dropped the phone and turned back toward Hae-in's bed. She pulled herself up using the bed frame, her legs buckling beneath her, and threw her body across Hae-in, shielding the little girl with her own poisoned, dying frame. Hyun-woo's world tilted. He'd been watching. He'd been waiting to catch her failing. Instead, he just watched her choose death. For his daughter. For a child that wasn't even hers. But if you think that's shocking, wait until you hear what happened 3 months before this moment. The moment that led a broken Nigerian nurse and a ruthless Korean crime boss to this impossible intersection. Because the truth is, Amaka wasn't supposed to care. She wasn't even supposed to stay. And Hyun-woo? He wasn't supposed to feel anything at all. So before we see what happens next in that bedroom, before we find out if Amaka survives, before we discover who poisoned those pills, we need to go back. Back to the funeral that started it all. If you want to see how a woman with nothing left to lose became the only person willing to die for a mafia boss's daughter, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notification bell. Because what you're about to witness will shatter everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and the impossible choices that define us. Now let's rewind to where this all began. 3 months earlier, the house had smelled like death. Not the sudden, violent death Hyun-woo was used to, the kind that came with gunpowder and screaming and blood splattered across expensive suits. No, this was different. This was the slow, creeping death that moved through the hallways like fog, settling into the furniture, the curtains, the very air his daughter breathed. It was the death that came with terminal diagnoses and hospice brochures and doctors who couldn't meet his eyes when they said the word inoperable. Hae-in had been 6 years old when she watched her mother die. Not peacefully, not in her sleep, She'd watched her mother's throat opened by a knife held by one of Choi Sung-min's men, watched the blood pool across the marble floor of their entryway, watched her mother's eyes go empty while she choked on her own screams. The police report said Hae-in had been found 4 hours later, still sitting in her mother's blood, still holding her mother's cold hand. She hadn't spoken since. Not a word, not a sound, not even a cry. The child psychologists called it selective mutism triggered by severe trauma. They said with time, with therapy, with patience, she might speak again. But that was before the leukemia. Before the diagnosis that gave her 6 months, maybe a year if the treatments worked. Before Hyun-woo realized his daughter would likely die having never said another word. 7 caregivers in 3 months. The first one lasted 2 weeks before she quit, citing emotional distress. The second made it 9 days. The third, 4. By the 7th, Hyun-woo had stopped interviewing them himself. He just had his assistant hire whoever was available and waited for the inevitable resignation letter. But then Amaka walked into his office. She didn't look like the others. The previous caregivers had been older Korean women, experienced in pediatric care, recommended by the best agencies in Seoul. Amaka was 29, Nigerian, and her resume had a 3-year gap she didn't bother explaining. She sat across from Hyun-woo's desk with her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, and when he asked why she thought she could handle a job 7 others had failed, she didn't smile politely or offer reassurances. "I don't know if I can," she said, her accent thick but her Korean precise. "But I know what it looks like when a child has given up. And I know what it looks like when everyone around them has given up too." Hyun-woo had been in the middle of pouring himself a drink. He stopped, the bottle hovering over the glass. "You think I've given up on my daughter? I think you're waiting for her to die," Amaka said, and her eyes, dark and unflinching, held his without apology. "I think you've already started grieving, and I think she knows it." He should have thrown her out, should have had security escort her from the building. Instead, he set the bottle down and leaned back in his chair. "What makes you so sure you're different?" "I'm not different," Amaka said quietly. "I've lost before. I know how it feels to watch children slip away. But the difference between me and your last 7 caregivers is that I'm not afraid of it anymore. They quit because they couldn't handle watching her die. I won't quit because I've already seen worse. And if she's going to die, she deserves to have someone in the room who isn't terrified of it." Hyun-woo hired her on the spot. That night, after Amaka had been given the keys and shown to the room adjacent to Hae-in's, Hyun-woo called his head of security into his office. "I want cameras," he said, pulling up the house blueprints on his computer. "Bedroom, hallway outside the bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. Anywhere she'll be with Hae-in." His security chief, a man named Dae-young who'd worked for Hyun-woo for 15 years, frowned. "You don't trust her?" "I don't trust anyone." Hyun-woo zoomed in on Hae-in's bedroom layout. "The others all broke eventually. I want to see the exact moment she does. I want to know what it looks like when someone decides my daughter isn't worth the effort anymore. And if she doesn't break?" Hyun-woo's jaw tightened. "Everyone breaks." By midnight, the cameras were installed. 12 of them throughout the house, all feeding directly to the monitors in Hyun-woo's private office. High definition, night vision, audio included. He told himself it was necessary. That after what happened to his wife, after losing 3 years of his daughter's voice, he couldn't afford to be careless. But the truth was darker than that. The truth was he needed to see the abandonment coming, needed to prepare for it. Because if he watched it happen in real time, maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't destroy him when Amaka inevitably walked away like all the others. He watched the first night from his office, a glass of whiskey growing warm in his hand. On screen, Amaka entered Hae-in's room at 8:30 p.m., carrying a small bag. Hae-in was already in bed, her eyes open but unfocused, staring at the ceiling like she was looking through it into some distant, unreachable place. Amaka didn't try to make her look, didn't speak to her in that bright, forced cheerfulness the other caregivers had used. Instead, she pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down, and took out knitting needles and yarn. She just knitted. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft click of needles and Amaka's quiet humming. It wasn't a Korean song. Hyun-woo didn't recognize the melody at all. Something rhythmic and low, almost mournful. Heian's eyes didn't move toward her, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. At 9 p.m., Amaka set down her knitting and spoke for the first time. I'm going to give you your medicine now, Heian. It might taste bitter, but I'll have water ready. She prepared the pills, 3 of them, and brought them to the bedside with a glass of water. Heian didn't move, didn't open her mouth, just kept staring at that ceiling like Amaka didn't exist. Amaka waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Then she set the pills on the nightstand. I'll leave them here. If you want to take them tonight, I'll help. If not, I'll try again in the morning. She went back to her knitting. Hyunwoo watched, expecting frustration, expecting her to try harder, to coax or beg or eventually give up and force the medication like the third caregiver had tried. But Amaka just hummed and knitted. And at 10 p.m., she stood, folded her work, and spoke again. I'm going to sleep in the room next door. If you need me, just knock on the wall. I'm a light sleeper. She turned off the lamp, leaving only the night light, and left the room. Heian didn't move, didn't take the pills. The next morning, Amaka found the pills exactly where she'd left them. Week 1 was the same. Every night, the same routine. Medication offered, medication refused. Humming and knitting. Gentle words that received no response. Heian's condition remained stable, but she didn't improve, didn't engage, didn't even look at Amaka directly. On day 8, Dae-young came into Hyunwoo's office while he was reviewing footage from the previous night. She's not doing anything? Dae-young said, watching over Hyunwoo's shoulder as Amaka knitted in silence. The kid doesn't even know she's there. I know. So why keep her? Hyunwoo didn't answer immediately. On screen, Amaka was reading aloud from a children's book. Something about a rabbit and a moon. Heian's eyes were closed, but Hyunwoo could tell from the slight tension in her shoulders that she wasn't asleep. She was listening. Because she's still here, Hyunwoo said finally. Every other caregiver needed to see results. Needed Heian to respond, to validate their efforts. This one doesn't seem to need anything. Maybe she's just better at hiding it. Maybe, Hyunwoo agreed. That's why I'm watching. By week 2, something shifted. It was small. So small Hyunwoo almost missed it. Amaka had just finished reading a story, some folktale about a tiger and a persimmon, and was closing the book when Heian's hand moved. Just an inch. Her fingers slid across the blanket toward the edge of the bed, toward where Amaka's hand rested on the mattress. The fingers didn't touch, stopped about 6 inches away, but they'd moved with intention. Amaka noticed. Hyunwoo saw her eyes flick down to Heian's hand, saw the way her breath caught, but she didn't react, didn't grab Heian's hand or make a big deal of it. She just let her own hand stay where it was, close enough to reach but not forcing contact. After a moment, she started humming again. Heian's fingers retreated, but Hyunwoo had seen it. The first voluntary movement his daughter had made toward another person in 3 years. He rewound the footage, watched it again, and again. She's reaching, he whispered to the empty room. Week 3, day 21. Hyunwoo sat in his office at 8:30 p.m. The same ritual he'd performed every night for 3 weeks. 6 monitors glowed in the darkness, showing different angles of his daughter's room. On the center screen, Amaka reached for the small tray on the nightstand, the evening medication. 3 white pills and a glass of water. The same routine as every other night. Except tonight, something was different. Amaka picked up the pill bottle, and instead of immediately dispensing the medication, she held it up to the lamplight. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Hyunwoo leaned forward, his whiskey glass forgotten on the desk. She was examining the pills. Her brow furrowed. She brought the bottle closer to her face, tilting it, studying the contents with an intensity that made Hyunwoo's pulse quicken. Then she unscrewed the cap, shook 2 pills into her palm, and did something that made his breath stop. She brought 1 pill to her nose and sniffed it. "What are you doing?" he whispered to the empty room. On screen, Amaka's expression shifted from confusion to something darker. Suspicion. Fear. She set 1 pill down carefully on the nightstand and picked up the other. For a long moment, she stared at it, her hand trembling. Then she crushed it between her fingers. The white powder scattered across her dark palm, fine as snow, Hyun-woo's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched her wet her finger, press it into the powder, and bring it to her lips. She touched it to her tongue. No, Hyun-woo breathed. Don't. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Amaka's pupils dilated. Her breath caught. She grabbed the edge of the nightstand so hard the lamp shook. And Hyun-woo understood. The pills were poison. Someone had poisoned his daughter's medication, and Amaka had just proven it by poisoning herself. No, no, no. He shot to his feet, his chair crashing backward, but he couldn't look away from the screen. Amaka's legs buckled. She collapsed to her knees, her body convulsing, and foam began forming at the corners of her mouth. But even as the poison tore through her system, even as her hands shook and her breathing turned ragged, she didn't scream for help. She crawled. Hyun-woo watched in frozen horror as this woman, this stranger he'd hired 3 weeks ago, this woman he'd been waiting to quit, dragged herself across the floor toward the phone on the dresser. Her fingers could barely grip the receiver. It took 3 attempts before she managed to dial. Child endangerment, she whispered into the phone, her voice thick and slurred. Park residence. Gangnam District. Send ambulance. Poisoning. The phone slipped from her hand. But instead of collapsing, instead of saving herself, Amaka turned her head toward the bed where Hae-in still lay. The little girl's eyes were open now, watching, and for the first time in 3 years, Hae-in made a sound. A small, frightened whimper. And Amaka, dying, poisoned, barely conscious, crawled back toward that bed. Hyun-woo ran. He sprinted from his office, taking the stairs 3 at a time, his heart threatening to explode from his chest. He could hear sirens in the distance, the ambulance Amaka had called, but they weren't close enough, weren't fast enough. He burst through Hae-in's bedroom door. Amaka was draped across his daughter's bed, her larger body completely covering Hae-in's small frame, shielding her, protecting her. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow and wet, but her arms were wrapped around Hae-in like a fortress. NWAM, she whispered in a language Hyun-woo didn't understand. I won't let them hurt you. Hae-in was crying. Not silently, not the way she'd cried for 3 years. Real sound was coming from her throat, broken and frightened, and her small hands were clutching Amaka's shirt, refusing to let go. Hyun-woo stood frozen in the doorway, watching this woman choose death to save his daughter. A child she'd known for 3 weeks. A child who'd never even spoken to her. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes. The police arrived in 6. By the time the paramedics had Amaka stabilized and loaded into the ambulance, Hyun-woo's entire security team had descended on the house. Dae-young was already on the phone with the pharmacy, demanding records. The medication bottle was bagged as evidence. And Hae-in, still silent but clutching the hospital gown they'd wrapped Amaka in before loading her onto the stretcher, was being examined by the EMTs. Hyun-woo rode in the ambulance with Amaka. She was unconscious now, her body limp, for lines running into both arms as the paramedics worked frantically to flush the poison from her system. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow. Is she going to make it? Hyun-woo asked. One of the paramedics glanced at him. We don't even know what she ingested yet. Until we do, we're just guessing at treatment. She ingested whatever was in my daughter's medication, Hyun-woo said. Test for that. We will, but... No. Hyun-woo's voice was steel. Test for it now. Not when we get to the hospital. Now. Because every second you waste is a second closer to her dying. And if she dies before you figure out what this is, my daughter dies next. The paramedic's eyes widened with understanding. He grabbed the radio. At the hospital, chaos. Hae-in was rushed to pediatric intensive care. Amaka to the ER. Hyun-woo found himself standing in a hallway between both rooms, unable to choose which one to go to, paralyzed by the knowledge that he might lose them both. Dr. Shin found him there 20 minutes later. The pills were fake, the doctor said without preamble. Placebos laced with a slow-acting toxin, something called sodium fluoroacetate. Rat poison. In small doses over time, it mimics the symptoms of treatment side effects. Fatigue, weakness, organ stress. Whoever did this wanted Hae-in's death to look natural. Like the cancer was just progressing faster than expected. How long? Hyun-woo's voice was barely human. At the rate it was building in her system? Another week, maybe 2. Then organ failure. it would have looked like the leukemia killed her. Hyunwoo's fist slammed into the wall so hard the plaster cracked. Who? He demanded. Who had access to her medication? That's what the police want to know. Dr. Shin hesitated. But Mr. Park, there's something else. The woman who ingested the poison, Amaka, she's asking for you. She's conscious. Hyunwoo ran. He burst into Amaka's room to find her propped up in bed, still deathly pale but alive, breathing, awake, and 4 drip fed into her arm, pumping what he assumed was the antidote into her system. Is Haein safe? The first words out of her mouth. Hyunwoo stopped at the foot of her bed, his chest heaving. Why didn't you just call me? The question tore out of him. You could have told me your suspicions. We could have tested the pills without you nearly dying. Would you have believed me? Amaka's eyes were clear despite the poison still working its way out of her system. A foreign nurse you've known for 3 weeks, accusing someone in your organization of trying to murder your daughter? Would you have acted fast enough? Hyunwoo opened his mouth, closed it. Men like you only believe evidence, Amaka continued, her voice growing stronger. Not suspicions, not theories, cold, hard proof. So I made myself the proof. My blood test doesn't lie. The video footage of me taking those pills straight from Haein's bottle doesn't lie. Now you have undeniable evidence that someone tried to poison her. And you can't ignore it. You can't explain it away. You have to act. She was right. God help him, she was right. If she'd come to him with suspicions, he would have been cautious, would have investigated quietly, would have given whoever did this time to cover their tracks. But this was war declared. Who had access to Haein's medication? Amaka asked. Everyone, Hyunwoo said bitterly. The pharmacy delivers it sealed, but once it's in the house, any of my staff could have switched it. The previous caregivers, my security team, He stopped. His brother, Minho, had been to the house twice in the past month, had asked about Haein's condition, had seemed almost too interested in her prognosis, her treatment schedule, her medication routine. Minho, who stood to inherit everything if Haein died. The rage that flooded through Hyunwoo was white-hot and absolutely glacial at the same time. I need to make a call, he said. Wait. Amaka's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. Before you do whatever you're about to do, I need to know. Is Haein safe? Really safe? And if you think finding out who poisoned Haein is the end of the story, you have no idea what's coming. Because the real question isn't who tried to kill her. It's why Amaka was willing to die for a child she barely knew. And the answer to that question will break your heart in ways you can't imagine. Stay with us. Hyunwoo looked down at Amaka's hand on his wrist. She's safe, he said quietly. I have 6 of my best men stationed outside her hospital room. No one gets in or out without my approval. Not doctors. Not nurses. No one. Amaka's grip loosened but didn't release completely. Promise me something. What? When you find out who did this, and I know you will, don't do it in front of her. Whatever you're planning, whatever revenge you're thinking about, don't let Haein see it. She's already watched one parent die violently. She doesn't need to watch you become a monster too. The words landed like bullets. Hyunwoo pulled his wrist free and left without answering. By midnight, Minho was in custody. Not police custody. Hyunwoo's custody. His younger brother sat zip-tied to a chair in the basement of one of Hyunwoo's warehouses, blood dripping from his split lip where Dae-young had persuaded him to stop lying. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage showed Minho entering the house on 3 separate occasions, always finding an excuse to go upstairs. Phone records linked him to a black market pharmacy that specialized in untraceable substances. And when the police searched his apartment, they found a second bottle of the exact same fake medication, along with detailed notes about Haein's treatment schedule. She was going to die anyway. Minho spat, his voice thick with blood and desperation. The cancer was going to kill her. All I did was speed it up. You would have inherited everything, and then when you died, it would have come to me. That's how it's supposed to work. That's family succession. Hyunwoo stood in the shadows, watching his brother, the man he'd protected since childhood, the man he'd brought into the organization, the man he'd trusted, justify murdering a 9-year-old girl. She's your niece, Hyunwoo said. his voice empty. She's a dying investment, Minho shot back. You've spent millions on her treatment. Millions that could have gone to expanding the business, to securing our territory, to... The first punch broke Minho's nose. The second shattered 2 teeth. Hyun-woo didn't remember throwing them. Didn't remember Dae-young pulling him off. Didn't remember anything until he was standing outside the warehouse. His knuckles split and bleeding, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. What do you want us to do with him? Dae-young asked quietly. 3 months ago, Hyun-woo would have had an answer. Would have known exactly what to do with someone who tried to murder his child. But Amaka's words echoed in his head. Don't let Hae-in see it. She doesn't need to watch you become a monster too. Turn him over to the police, Hyun-woo said. Give them everything. Every piece of evidence. Let him rot in prison. Dae-young blinked. Boss, if we do that, he'll talk. He knows too much about the organization. He could bring down. I don't care. Hyun-woo's voice was hollow. My daughter almost died because I was too busy protecting my empire to notice my own brother was poisoning her. If the price of her safety is losing everything else, I'll pay it. He went back to the hospital. Hae-in was asleep when he entered her room, curled on her side with Amaka's hospital gown clutched in her small fists. The nurses had tried to take it, tried to replace it with a proper blanket, but Hae-in had fought them, had screamed. Not with words but with raw, primal sound, until they'd let her keep it. Hyun-woo stood by her bed, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was so small, so fragile. How had he convinced himself that surveillance cameras were enough? That watching her from a distance was the same as protecting her? A soft knock made him turn. One of the nurses stood in the doorway. Sir, the woman Amaka. She's being discharged. The doctors cleared her. She wanted us to tell you before she left. She's leaving? The words came out sharper than intended. She said her job was finished. That Hae-in was safe now and didn't need her anymore. No. Hyun-woo ran through the hospital corridors, taking corners too fast, nearly colliding with a gurney. He found Amaka in the discharge area, dressed in the clothes she'd worn 3 weeks ago when he'd first hired her, signing paperwork with hands that still trembled slightly from the poison. You can't leave, he said. She looked up, unsurprised to see him. My contract was to care for Hae-in. She's in the hospital now. She has doctors, nurses. She has a hospital gown that she won't let go of because it smells like you. Hyun-woo interrupted. The nurses tried to take it and she screamed. Not words. Not yet. But sound. Real, human sound for the first time in 3 years. And it was because she thought she was losing you. Amaka's pen stilled on the paper. She needs you, Hyun-woo continued. Not as a nurse. Not as hired help. She needs you as... He struggled for the word. As the person who was willing to die for her. Do you understand what that means to a child who watched everyone else abandon her? I didn't abandon her. I saved her. And now you're leaving. Hyun-woo's voice cracked. How is that different? Amaka set down the pen. Because I can't watch her die. That was the deal I made with myself when I left Lagos. No more dying children. I'd find work that didn't require me to hold someone while they slipped away. But Hae-in. Her voice broke. She's going to die, Mr. Park. Maybe not from poison. But the leukemia is terminal. And I can't be there when it happens. I can't survive that again. Then don't. She looked at him, confused. Don't be there as her nurse, Hyun-woo said. Be there as someone who cares whether she lives or dies. Be there as someone who sings to her at 2 in the morning when she can't sleep. Be there as the person who taught her it's okay to make sound again. I didn't teach her that. The fear did. She made noise because she was terrified of losing. Amaka stopped, realization dawning. Oh, she's attached to you, Hyun-woo said. And you're attached to her. I've watched the footage. I've seen the way you look at her when you think no one's watching. Like she matters. Like she's not just another dying patient. She's not. Amaka's whisper was barely audible. But that's exactly why I have to leave. Because when she dies, it will break me. Completely. And I barely survived being broken once. Hyun-woo stepped closer. What if she doesn't die? The doctors said 6 months to a year. But they also said the poison should have killed her in 2 weeks, and she survived 3. They said she'd never speak again, and she just screamed for your hospital gown. Maybe, he took a breath. Maybe the doctors don't know everything. Amaka shook her head. Hope is dangerous. So is poison. You swallowed it anyway. She laughed. A broken, desperate sound. That was different. That was a choice I could control. Cancer isn't. You're right, Hyunwoo said. You can't control whether she lives or dies. But you can control whether she dies alone or dies knowing someone loved her enough to stay. You told me once that the 15 children in Lagos died alone because their families couldn't afford to miss work. You said if Haein died, she'd die knowing someone cared. Were you lying? No, but... Then stay. The silence stretched between them. I'll double your salary, Hyunwoo added. Triple it. Whatever you need. This isn't about money. Amaka's eyes glistened. This is about survival. My survival. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to watch another child die. You're strong enough to die for one, Hyunwoo said quietly. That's stronger than anything I've ever seen. Amaka closed her eyes, tears finally spilling over. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. If I stay, I need you to understand something. I won't just be her nurse. I can't maintain professional distance anymore. If I'm going to be there if she dies, then I need to be allowed to love her. Really love her. Not as a patient. As a person. I understand. And I need you to stop watching us through cameras. She met his gaze directly. I know why you did it. I know you were protecting yourself, waiting for me to fail. But if you want me to stay, I need you in the room. Not behind monitors. Actually present. Actually trying. The words hit harder than his brother's confession. I don't know how to do that, Hyunwoo admitted. Neither do I, Amaka said. But we'll figure it out together. She picked up her bag and walked back toward the elevators. Hyunwoo stood frozen, unsure if that meant she was leaving or staying. Then she pressed the button for the pediatric floor. Subscribe now because what happens next will show you what real sacrifice looks like. And it's not what you expect. 3 months passed. Haein was discharged from the hospital with a new medication regimen, carefully monitored by doctors who personally delivered and verified every pill. The leukemia was still there, still terminal but stable. The crisis had passed. Amaka moved into the house full-time. Hyunwoo dismantled every camera. At first, the silence was deafening. He'd spent so long watching monitors that being in the actual house, hearing actual sounds instead of transmitted audio, felt foreign. Wrong. He found himself reaching for his phone to check the feeds before remembering they didn't exist anymore. Instead, he started walking past Haein's room. Just walking. Not going in. Not interrupting. Just being nearby. One night, 2 weeks after Amaka returned, Hyunwoo woke at 2 a.m. to sounds coming from upstairs. Not distress. Not emergency. Just sound. He walked to Haein's room and found the door slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see Amaka sitting on the edge of Haein's bed. The little girl curled against her side. And Amaka was singing. The melody was the same one she'd hummed that first night. Low and rhythmic. Words in Igbo that Hyunwoo couldn't understand. But her voice was different now. It wasn't steady. It cracked and wavered. And when Hyunwoo looked closer, he saw why. Amaka was crying. Not quietly. Not trying to hide it. Her whole body shook with sobs even as she kept singing. Kept holding Haein close. Kept rocking her gently. And Haein was crying too. Silent tears streaming down her face. Her small hands clutching Amaka's nightshirt like a lifeline. Hyunwoo stood frozen in the hallway, watching this ritual of shared grief. When the song ended, Amaka's voice was barely a whisper. Sleep now, NWAM. I'm here. I'm not leaving. She stayed until Haein's breathing evened out, until sleep finally claimed the little girl. Then she carefully extracted herself, wiped her eyes, and turned toward the door. She nearly collided with Hyunwoo. How long have you been standing there? She asked, her voice hoarse. Long enough. He couldn't stop staring at her tear-stained face. Does this happen every night? Amaka nodded. Around 2 a.m. She wakes up from nightmares. Sometimes about her mother. Sometimes about... She stopped. Sometimes about me leaving. And I sing to her until she can sleep again. Why do you cry when you sing? Amaka looked back at the sleeping child. Because she's not the only one I'm singing to. When I close my eyes, I see their faces. All 15 of them. Chioma, Adiz, Emeka. Blessing. Her voice broke. I know their names. I remember every single one. And when I sing to Hayin, I'm singing to all of them. To the children I couldn't save. To the ones who died alone because their mothers had to work double shifts just to afford the hospital bed. She wiped her face roughly. I cry because Hayin is all of them. And this one time, I have the chance to make sure at least one child doesn't die wondering if anyone cared. Hyunwoo felt something crack in his chest. What if you can't save her? The question came out rougher than intended. Her chances are still. Then I'll hold her while she goes, Amaka said firmly. Those 15 children died alone. Their parents couldn't afford to be there. They died in beds with nurses who saw them as case numbers, who moved on to the next patient before their bodies were even cold. If Hayin dies, she took a shaking breath. If she dies knowing someone loved her enough to cry for her. That's not failure. That's the only victory that matters. The silence stretched between them. Can I? Hyunwoo's voice caught. Can I be here? Tomorrow night when she wakes up. I want to be in the room. Amaka studied his face. You don't have to. I need to. The admission cost him. I've been absent for 3 years. Watching through screens, keeping distance, telling myself it was protection when really it was just cowardice. If my daughter is going to die, I need to stop watching and start being present. The next night, Hyunwoo sat in the chair by the window while Amaka held Hayin through her nightmares and sang through her tears. He didn't know the words, didn't understand the language, but he sat there, present, no cameras, no distance. And when Amaka's voice finally broke completely, when she couldn't sing anymore, Hyunwoo found himself humming. It wasn't pretty, wasn't even on key, but it was there. And Amaka picked up the melody, her voice strengthening, and together they filled the room with sound until Hayin finally slept. It became their ritual. Every night at 2 a.m., Amaka sang. Hyunwoo hummed. Hayin cried silent tears and slowly, impossibly, began to heal. 6 months after the poisoning incident, the doctors delivered news that made no medical sense. Hayin's leukemia was in remission, not cured. Remission wasn't cure. But the cancer that should have killed her within a year had retreated. Her blood counts were improving. Her strength was returning. And most miraculous of all, she was speaking. Not full sentences yet, but words. Real words. Amaka was the first one. She'd said it at breakfast one morning, so quietly that Amaka almost didn't hear. But when she turned around, Hayin was looking directly at her, her lips forming the syllables again. Amaka. Amaka dropped the plate she was holding. It shattered on the floor, but she didn't notice, didn't care. She crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled Hayin into her arms, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Yes, baby. Yes, I'm here. I'm Amaka. Say it again. Amaka. Stronger this time. Then, hesitantly, stay. Forever, Amaka whispered. I'm staying forever. Hyunwoo stood in the doorway, watching this moment unfold, and realized he was crying too. His daughter was speaking. His daughter was healing. And the woman who'd made it possible, who'd literally died and come back to make it possible, was holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Which she was. But somewhere between the midnight singing and the breakfast conversations and the slow, painful journey back to life, Hyunwoo realized something terrifying. Amaka had become precious too. He noticed it in small moments. The way she laughed when Hayin told terrible jokes. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about the children she'd lost. No longer with just grief, but with love and memory. The way she touched his shoulder when she passed him in the hallway, casual and comfortable, like they were family. Like they were something more than employer and employee. And when Choi Sungmin's men showed up at the house 3 weeks later, everything Hyunwoo had been trying not to feel became impossible to ignore. It happened fast. Amaka had gone to the market for groceries. Hayin was at school for the first time in months, attending half-days with a special education assistant. The house was supposed to be secure, but Choi had been planning this for years. Hyunwoo's phone rang at noon. I have your woman. Choi's voice was smooth, satisfied. The Nigerian nurse. Amaka, isn't it? Ice flooded Hyun-woo's veins. If you hurt her. Oh, I'm not going to hurt her. Not yet. First, we're going to play a game. Choi's laugh was poison. You remember my son, Park? The one you killed 5 years ago during that territory dispute? He was 19. Had his whole life ahead of him. You put 2 bullets in his chest and left him to bleed out in an alley. Hyun-woo's hand tightened on the phone. He remembered. God help him, he remembered. I've been waiting for the right moment to make you understand what that felt like. Choi continued. At first, I thought killing your daughter would be enough. But then you went and got her a new caregiver. And I realized you care about this woman. Maybe even more than you care about the girl. What do you want? I want you to choose. Choi's voice turned sharp. I have Amaka in a warehouse in Incheon. I also have a USB drive containing evidence of every crime you've committed over the past 15 years. Every murder, every deal, every bribe. The police receive that drive in exactly 3 hours unless you retrieve it first. Hyun-woo's blood turned to ice. The USB is in a safe deposit box in Gangnam. You can get there in 40 minutes if you leave now. But here's the problem, the moment you go for that drive, I kill Amaka. And if you come for Amaka first, the evidence goes to the police and you spend the rest of your life in prison. You're insane. I'm fair, Choi interrupted. You get to choose what matters more. The woman who saved your daughter or your freedom. Save Amaka and Haein becomes an orphan. She goes into state care, dies in some government facility without either of you. Or save yourself. Build a legitimate life for Haein, and let Amaka die knowing she was worth less than your freedom. The line went dead. Hyun-woo stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. 3 hours. Dae-young burst into the office minutes later. I heard. What are we doing? Assemble everyone, Hyun-woo said, his voice mechanical. I need our best trackers finding that warehouse. And I need someone to retrieve the USB drive. Boss, if we go after both. We're not going after both. Hyun-woo's hands were shaking. We're going after Amaka. Dae-young stared. The evidence will bury you. You'll lose everything. Haein will lose you. Haein already lost me 3 years ago when I chose to grieve instead of parent. Hyun-woo said. She got me back because of Amaka. Because that woman taught me how to be present. How to love something more than power or control or fear. He grabbed his jacket. Amaka didn't just save Haein's life. She saved mine. And if the price of keeping her alive is losing everything else, I'll pay it. But Haein needs her father. No. Hyun-woo's voice cracked. She needs the woman who sings to her at 2 a.m. The woman who held her through nightmares and taught her to speak again. The woman who was willing to die testing poison just to prove someone was trying to hurt her. I'm just the man who watched it all happen from behind cameras. Amaka is the one who lived it. He headed for the door. Find that warehouse. We have 3 hours to get her back. They found it in 2. The warehouse was abandoned, rusted, surrounded by shipping containers. Hyun-woo's team moved in fast. 12 armed men against Choi's 6. The firefight lasted for minutes. When Hyun-woo finally kicked down the door to the room where they'd been keeping Amaka, he found her zip-tied to a chair, bruised but alive. Her eyes went wide when she saw him. You came, she whispered. But the evidence is on its way to the police right now, Hyun-woo said, cutting through the zip ties. I chose you. No. Amaka grabbed his arms. No, you can't. Haein needs you. She needs a father you can't go to prison for. She needs you, Hyun-woo said fiercely. You're the one who made her speak. You're the one she reaches for in nightmares. I'm just the man who finally learned to be in the room. Amaka was crying. This is insane. You're throwing away everything. I already lost everything when my wife died and my daughter went silent, Hyun-woo said. You gave it back. I won't let you die wondering if you mattered. They made it back to the house with 20 minutes to spare. The police were already there, waiting. Hyun-woo stepped out of the car, hands already raised. Dae-young moved to intercept, but Hyun-woo shook his head. Let them do their job. The lead detective approached with handcuffs, reciting rights that Hyun-woo barely heard. Behind him, Amaka was being helped out of the vehicle by paramedics, still shaking from the kidnapping. Her eyes met his across the driveway. Why? She mouthed, tears streaming down her face. Why did you choose me? He wanted to answer. Wanted to tell her that somewhere between the midnight songs and the breakfast conversations and watching her love his daughter back to life, she'd stopped being the hired help and become essential. Wanted to tell her that the moment Choi had given him that impossible choice, he'd felt clarity for the first time in 3 years. But the detective was already leading him toward the police car. Wait! The voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Everyone turned. Choi Sung-min stood at the edge of the property, flanked by 2 officers. But he wasn't restrained, wasn't being arrested. He was walking forward voluntarily, a USB drive held in his raised hand. I need to make a confession, Choi said loudly, his voice carrying across the driveway. Everything on this drive, it's fabricated. Edited footage, doctored documents, fake evidence designed to frame Park Hyun-woo for crimes I committed. The detective's grip on Hyun-woo loosened. What? Choi moved closer, his eyes locked on Hyun-woo. I wanted him to choose. I wanted to see if a man like him, a man who'd built an empire on violence and control, could love something more than power. And he did. His voice cracked. He chose her over everything. His freedom. His daughter's future. Everything. He turned to the detective. The kidnapping was real. The ultimatum was real. But the evidence against Park? I manufactured it. The real criminal here is me. I've been running illegal operations for 15 years, using Park as a cover. I killed his wife 3 years ago to start a war between our organizations. I tried to frame him because I wanted to watch him suffer the way I suffered when he killed my son. The silence was deafening. Why are you confessing? Hyun-woo demanded, his voice hoarse. Choi looked at him with something that might have been respect or might have been devastation. Because you won. Not through violence or strategy or power. You won because you learned to lose the right things. His eyes shifted to Amaka. When my son died, I chose revenge over everything. Over my wife who begged me to stop. Over my daughter, who hasn't spoken to me in 4 years because she's terrified of what I've become. I chose anger and it destroyed my family. He held out his wrists for the handcuffs. You chose love, and it saved yours. That's something I'll never have again. So yes, Park, you won. Not because you're stronger, because you learned what actually matters. The police took Choi away. The detective looked at Hyun-woo, clearly confused. We'll need statements from everyone. But for now, he removed the handcuffs. You're free to go. Hyun-woo stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Then Amaka was there, crashing into him with enough force to make him stumble. She was sobbing, her whole body shaking, and he wrapped his arms around her because he didn't know what else to do. You chose me, she kept saying. You chose me over everything. I chose us, Hyun-woo corrected quietly. You, me, Hae-in. The family we've become. She pulled back just enough to look at his face. A family? If you'll have us. Before she could answer, a car pulled into the driveway. Hae-in's school transport. The little girl climbed out, her backpack nearly as big as she was, and stopped dead when she saw the police cars and ambulances. Amaka? Her voice was small but clear. Appa. It was the first time she'd called him that. Father. In 3 years of silence and 6 months of healing, she'd never used the word. Hyun-woo felt his knees go weak. Hae-in ran to them, and suddenly all 3 of them were holding each other in the middle of the driveway, crying and laughing and whole in a way none of them had been before. That night, after the police had left and the statements had been given and Hae-in had been checked by doctors and pronounced physically fine, Hyun-woo did something he'd been thinking about for weeks. He called both Amaka and Hae-in into the living room. I need to show you both something, he said. He removed his shirt, revealing the scars that covered his torso. Bullet wounds, knife marks, burns from his violent life. He'd spent years hiding them, ashamed of what they represented. Hae-in, show yours. Confused, Hae-in rolled up her sleeves. For scars from her treatment, biopsy marks, and older scars, thin white lines on her wrists from the dark months when grief had driven her to hurt herself in silence. Now you, Amaka. Shaking, Amaka revealed her own history written in scar tissue. Burns from the Lagos clinic fire that had killed 2 of the 15 children. Marks from her breakdown, evidence of a woman who tried to end her own pain when the weight of loss became too much. and fresh scars on her arms from the poison, still pink and healing. I've spent my life hiding these, Hyunwoo said quietly, thinking they made me unworthy. But Amaka, you told Haein once that scars are proof we survived. When Choi gave me that choice, you or my freedom, I realized something. I wasn't choosing between you and Haein's future. I was choosing what kind of man I wanted to be for both of you. He knelt between them, creating a triangle. A man who hides behind power and control, or a man who lives in the room with the people he loves. When Haein has nightmares now, she comes to both of us. Not because one of us is enough, because together we are enough. He looked at Amaka, his heart hammering. I'm not proposing because you saved Haein. I'm proposing because you saved me. You taught me that the bravest thing isn't controlling everything. It's being present for anything. I don't want you to stay as Haein's nurse. I want you to stay as my person, as our person. Will you marry me? Amaka's hands flew to her mouth, tears already falling. You chose me over your freedom, she whispered. How could I say anything but yes? Haein looked between them, her eyes wide. Then she did something neither of them expected. She placed her small hand on top of their joined hands. Family, she said clearly. We're family now. 6 months later, Seoul was wrapped in early spring blossoms when Amaka and Hyunwoo married in a traditional Korean ceremony. Amaka wore a crimson hanbok that made her dark skin glow, her hair adorned with traditional ornaments. Hyunwoo stood in traditional attire, tears already streaming down his face before the ceremony even began. Haein was the flower girl, healthy and radiant and alive in ways the doctors still couldn't fully explain. Her remission had held. Her speech had returned completely. She walked down the aisle scattering petals and grinning so wide it looked like her face might split. The ceremony included a modern addition that Amaka had requested. During the vows, a silk ribbon was wrapped around their joined hands. But not just their hands. Haein's hand was included too, all three of them bound together. And as the ribbon was tied, the officiant blessed their scars. These marks are not shame, he said in Korean. Amaka's translator whispering the words to her. They are proof. Proof that you survived. Proof that you fought. Proof that you loved each other enough to bleed for it. Hyunwoo looked at his daughter, then at his wife, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. 2 years later, the house was unrecognizable. Not physically. The structure was the same. But the energy, the life that filled it was completely transformed. Laughter echoed through hallways that had once been silent. Cooking smells replaced the antiseptic scent of medical equipment. And in Haein's room, where Hyunwoo had once watched through hidden cameras, there were now drawings covering every wall. Pictures of 3 people. Family. Haein was 11 now, cancer-free for 18 months. Her doctors called it a miracle. Hyunwoo called it Amaka. The woman had somehow loved his daughter back from the edge of death through nothing but presence and persistence and songs sung through tears at 2 in the morning. Amaka worked at a pediatric oncology center now, one that Hyunwoo had funded in her honor. She saved children there. The 15 she'd lost in Lagos had become hundreds she'd helped in Seoul. Children who might have died alone now had someone who sang to them, who cried for them, who made sure they knew they mattered. Hyunwoo had left the organization completely. No more crime, no more violence. He ran legitimate businesses now, consulted on security for corporations, and came home every night at 6 p.m. for family dinner. It was at one of those dinners that Haein asked the question. Amaka, do you ever think about the children you lost? The 15 from before. The table went quiet. Hyunwoo set down his chopsticks, ready to redirect the conversation if it became too painful. But Amaka smiled. Not a sad smile. Peaceful one. Every day, she said. But not the way I used to. Before, I thought about them with guilt. With shame that I couldn't save them. Now I think about them with love. With gratitude that I got to know them, even if it was only for a little while. She reached across the table and took Haein's hand. And I think about how they led me here. To you. To your father. To this family. I don't believe everything happens for a reason. But I believe we can find reason in everything that happens. Those 15 children taught me what matters. They taught me that love isn't measured in time. It's measured in presence. Haein squeezed her hand. They'd be proud of you. For saving other kids like them. I hope so, baby. I really hope so. That night, after Hae-in had gone to bed, Hyunwoo found Amaka standing in front of the photograph they'd hung in the entryway. It showed 3 sets of arms, his scarred and weathered, hers marked by fire and poison, Hae-in's small and healing, all interlinked. Below it, a caption in both Korean and English. 흉터는 우리가 살아남았다는 증거입니다. Scars are proof we survived. Do you ever regret it? Hyunwoo asked quietly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Tasting that poison? Nearly dying. Amaka leaned back into him. Never. Because that moment, that choice, it proved something I'd forgotten. That I was still capable of fighting for someone. That I wasn't broken beyond repair. You were never broken. We were all broken, Amaka corrected. You, me, Hae-in. All of us shattered in different ways. But we didn't try to fix each other. We just learned to fit our broken pieces together until they made something whole. She turned in his arms. I spent years watching life through grief, afraid to love again because losing hurt too much. You spent years watching life through cameras, afraid to be in the frame. And Hae-in watched life through silence, afraid to make noise in a world that had become too painful. And now we're living, Amaka said simply. Not watching, not waiting, actually living. My daughter is healed. My wife sings without tears. And I finally understand. Love isn't about perfect choices. It's about impossible ones. The ones that cost you everything and give you everything back. They stood there in the quiet house, holding each other while upstairs their daughter slept peacefully. No nightmares, no fear. Just a child who'd survived the impossible and learned to trust life again. Outside, Seoul glittered with lights. Inside, a family born from poison and grief and sacrifice had learned what it meant to truly live. If this story touched your heart, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so you never miss stories like this. Stories about impossible choices and the kind of love that changes everything. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what sacrifice means to you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's struggling to believe that broken things can become beautiful, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that scars aren't endings. They're proof we survived long enough to find what matters. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And remember, the bravest thing you'll ever do is choose to be present, even when it costs you everything.